Hi, I'm Liz Granberg-Jerome from Gypsy Dreamer Quilts, and I'm going to walk you through the process of making a hexified panel quilt, and I'll be using the new Whirlwind panel from Timeless Treasures. The hexified panel quilt is a variation on Maxine Rosenthal's one-block wonder technique, but instead of just 6 repeats making hexies, we're using 7 panels, 6 to make the hexies, and then creating the continuous color flow around the uncut 7th panel. The first step is always to separate your panels and to give them a good press with Best Press or your favorite starch. This gets all of the wrinkles and the folds, any creases out of your fabric before you're ready to start layering them. So we've already done that process, and now we're ready to cut. And I cut my panels in half, about where the fold was. This gives me, since I cut my strips with the fabric, this gives me 2 sets that are going to fit within my ruler, and I have selected a spot just off center from where the fold was so that we're not going to sacrifice the butterflies. And now we're ready to cut. Our panels, our stacks of 6, have now been split in 2, and I'm going to slide one set across and put it across to the side. And now I'm going to take this set here and we're going to line up the edges. I'm going to pick a spot in the corner here, and I'm going to pick right here in the V of this little flower, and on each layer I'm going to put a pin right in the same spot, and I'm using flathead pins. They're a little bit longer than my regular sewing pins, which will be useful, and I'm going to leave that pin there. And then I'm going to come over here to the opposite corner. So this is the edge we just cut, and now I'm going to go to the selvage edge so that I'm going across with the fabric. And I'm going to put a pin in here, right where the little black piece ends on this layer. And now I'm going to hold those pins with a finger and a thumb on the back and between 2 fingers on the front. And I'm going to shake those out and get all of those layers to play well together. Lay it back on the table, and then while these pins are perpendicular, while they're standing up, I'm going to put a pin in and hold those in place. And if it wants to shift and lean over, I'm going to redo it. That's pretty straight. I'm going to pull that one out, and then same thing over here. And I'm not as interested in going down and back up as I am just going through the layers and keeping that pin standing up. And now I have those pinned. I might also do the other corners, but I don't always. You're going to have to see where things are. Now if I put a pin here in this petal, I'm already at the corner of that petal on the back side. So I think my layers are pretty well lined up with just the 2 pins. So I'm going to turn this around, and you've got to figure out what your shortest layer is, because you need to trim one edge. And I know I cut these fairly straight across, so I'm going to come in about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of that top layer, which is the shortest layer in this stack of 6. And I'm going to cut and make sure that all 6 layers are nice and lined up. And now if we look at the edge, they should be the flowers and the elements in the design should be nicely lined up. And I'm only going to do that cut on one side, and now I'm going to start cutting my strips. And I cut 2 3/4 inch strips. Now when I've got my fabric off to the side here and my ruler is just on the table, I often put a strip of shelf liner under my ruler to help support it and hold it in place. And I've got 1, 2, and 3/4 all the way down the strip there. And now I'm ready to cut. Slide this over and go 2 3/4. And now I have another layer or another stack under my ruler, so it's going to be supported and stay in place just fine. And I'll keep working my way across. Now we have all of our strips cut. And I'm going to set those aside and stack them up over here. And then we're ready to actually start cutting triangle sets. For the triangles, I'm using the Gypsy Dreamer Quilts 5.5 inch 60-degree triangle ruler, which is small enough to fit in your hand. It's marked with 1/4 inches. And I use mine with a piece of mold foam padding. And that gives me a dimensional guide on the back of my ruler that I can set down and line up with the bottom of the row. And I can cut from here. And then set my pieces up here and make a stack. I'll invert the ruler, line up the cut edge and the edge across the bottom with my dimensional guide, and make another cut. And I'll continue to stack them like this so that they're alternating in direction. And I usually make 1 stack per row. And that's a good number of hexies to work on at a time without getting too overwhelmed. With a 24-inch panel like this, I'm getting 8 rows, and at 2 3/4 inch, I should get 12 sets of triangles per row, which comes out to about 190 to 195 sets of triangles to make hexies, which is a nice number to design with. Okay, and it's time to sew hexies. And when we lay these out, because they're equilateral triangles, we actually get 3 options for each block layout. So you want to turn them and turn all of the triangles the same direction to see what option number 2 looks like. Again, turn them one at a time, all the same direction to see option 3. And this one, I definitely am going with the butterfly wings out from the center. And I'm going to take 2 pairs, right sides together, and the other 2 I'm going to place with the point up, and those will be the 3rd pieces that go on. And now I'm ready to sew. And you want to line up your points at the top and bottom of each piece, of each pair. Now I can take the first pair, clip them off, and we roll open the seams. If you press the seams open and you're using a ruler with points on all 3 corners, you end up with dog ears that stick out, and you want them. So there's our center We'll flip this over and put it on top, and we're ready to sew the third piece onto the first half, keeping those points together. Taking the second pair, pressing that seam open. There's my center, and I'm ready to sew that piece on. And now I'll take another set. Again, we'll lay them out. There are some people who lay them out, and whatever they get with the straight edge on the outside, that's what they take. I don't always. Sometimes I turn them and I go for my favorite layout of the three. There's number 2. You might notice the color focus changes as you turn it. I think I'll go back to the butterfly wings in the center again. Those make a nice design. So I take 2 and 2, center points up, and the remaining 2, center points up, and I'll sew 2 pairs together. Now the pair that I cut off, I'll separate, and even on these we will press open, creating a dog ear at the center of your hexie, or of your half. And that dog ear will be used when we're sewing these together into rows. So now I'm going to overlap about a 1/2 inch and take a single pin and put it right in the center where all those seams come together, and that holds your hexie together. All of the hexies have been sewn into 2 halves, and now it's time to pin them and get them ready for the design wall. So I overlap them about a 1/2 inch so that there's a 1/4 inch on either side sticking out, and that accounts for the 2/4 inch seams taken from each side. Once they're pinned, they are ready to go on the design wall. Now they won't be sewn to themselves until the long rows are sewn together. You can see the variety of some of the blocks that have come out of these. Even subtle things like the swirls in the background in this one will make a difference in that block when we put it up on the wall. Cutting 2 3/4 inch strips have netted us about 190 blocks, so we'll have plenty to design with. All the hexies have been made, and now the panel and all of the hexies have been put on the wall, and I've built a basic structure where I have the same number across the top and the bottom and matching numbers up and down each side. And now it's time to play and start shuffling things around and filling in the notches with half hexies to complete the section around the panel. Not every hexie will go into a quilt. So there may be orphan halves that don't go in, or a hexie may be split across the panel. Let's see. Take this one here. And I'm trying to blend. And then it's just picking hexies that might belong somewhere different. and half of this one that matches the tail of the Hummer over here. Now I'll take photos of this with my camera and look at it from that perspective and keep shuffling until I'm happy. After several days of shuffling, we now have a complete layout and we're ready to sew our rows together. And when I sew my rows together, the first thing I do is I pin at least 2 rows at a time. So I'll take this first one and separate that full hexie and pin them up. And then I'm going to pin the halves in long rows. And that's what I'll take to the sewing machine. Once I have a row pinned, I'm going to roll it up to within probably 2 seams worth so that these don't come unpinned as I'm moving them around on the sewing machine. And I'll click them on each side of that row and just keep those pieces together so that they don't fall apart as I'm moving them around. And now I'm ready to go to the sewing machine. When sewing rows together, I've pinned all of my pieces one on top of the other, but you're going to take the first piece off and flip it over and have this interesting angle where your 2 edges come together. Make sure you match up your points and dog ears on both ends. If you're working with a ruler that has a blunt point, then you want to make sure that you start sewing where the 2 fabrics meet and have a point sticking out on the end so that you have a nice straight edge when you're sewing your rows together. I tend to chain piece at least 2 rows at a time. I find it goes quicker and smoother for me and I waste less thread. So I clip the first row off and bring it back around the front, match up my points and dog ears, and make sure the points are matched at this end and ease a little if you need to. And these are the short rows from above the panel. But I do the same thing for the long rows. On the long rows, I will roll them up and clip them with Wonder Clips, or pin them if I can't find my clips. And that way the long rows are less likely to come apart or come unpinned and leave you wondering where a loose section belongs. When the rows are completely sewn, you're going to take them to the ironing board and press those seams open. And at that point, I usually give them a good starch with best press and take them back to the wall. These 4 short rows for above the panel are ready to pin. I've given them a good press with best press so they're nice and stiff. And I'm going to take and I'm going to match up the dog ears. I don't ever cut off the dog ears. Even if there's fullness in between, I just match up the dog ears and that matches my points. And then any fullness in the triangles in between those dog ears will ease in and you'll have a nice row with sharp points. Here's one where I can tell there's a little fullness. That will ease out as I'm sewing, and I put a pin in, and the points I will connect when I'm sewing. I don't necessarily pin the very ends. As I sew, I'm checking to make sure the seams underneath are not flipping over, because I don't want any flipped seams. So I'm going to make sure everything stays where it's supposed to. And as I get close to where that seam overlaps, I'll pull that pin out And I'm not going real fast. It's a start and stop process. Making sure those dog ears stay lined up. And the first pair are sewn together. And if we open that up, we should have nice point junctions. All of the points line up, and that's just from lining up the dog ears. These will also be pressed open, and then sections will be sewn together, and they'll all go back up on the wall until it's all assembled.